Imagine being richer than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates combined, so powerful that governments had to rewrite the rules of capitalism just to contain you. This isn't a story about luck, it's about strategy, and about the few men who saw collapse not as an ending, but as the deal of a lifetime. This is the story of how a handful of insiders turned the Great Depression into a billion-dollar opportunity. At their peak, men like Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., Charles E. Mitchell, and the partners of J.P. Morgan and Company controlled fortunes that would rival today's tech billionaires. Adjusted for inflation, Kennedy alone was worth nearly $4 billion in modern terms, while Morgan's influence stretched across entire governments. And the system they helped create, speculation, insider trading, leverage, still echoes through modern finance today. To understand how they did it, you have to go back to the Roaring '20s, a decade that believed prosperity had no limits. Banks were handing out credit like candy. Ordinary workers were buying stocks with borrowed money, convinced the market would never fall. The newspapers called it a new era of wealth. In the middle of it all stood Charles E. Mitchell, the charismatic head of National City Bank, the forerunner of Citibank. Mitchell wasn't just a banker, he was a salesman of dreams. He turned his bank into a stock-selling machine, pushing ordinary Americans into markets they barely understood. He blurred the line between advice and self-interest, and for a while, it worked perfectly. Across town, another man was watching closely, Joseph Patrick Kennedy Sr. The son of an Irish immigrant, Kennedy had started small, running a brokerage and dabbling in real estate. He wasn't born into power, he studied it. And where others saw endless prosperity, Kennedy saw a storm quietly forming. His first major move came from a simple observation. As the story goes, he once received a stock tip from a shoeshine boy. If even the shoeshine boy was buying stocks, Kennedy reasoned, then everyone was already in, and there was no one left to buy. Quietly, he began to sell. By mid-1929, while Wall Street still celebrated record highs, Kennedy had liquidated most of his holdings and converted his profits into cash and gold. Then came October 24th, 1929. Black Thursday. Panic ripped through the market. Investors dumped everything they owned, and billions of dollars vanished in a matter of days. While ordinary Americans watched their life savings disappear, Kennedy waited. Patient, silent, and liquid. While the public was ruined, Kennedy and a small circle of Wall Street elites waited for the fire sale. With prices down more than 80%, they began buying again, not from faith, but from strategy. Kennedy snapped up real estate in New York and Los Angeles, distressed companies, even struggling Hollywood studios. He understood that when others are forced to sell, power concentrates. At the same time, Charles E. Mitchell, though disgraced by the crash, used insider pools to quietly buy back the same shares his own bank had once sold at inflated prices. J.P. Morgan and Company stepped in as a self-appointed savior of the system. But every rescue came with a price. They acquired collapsing competitors for pennies on the dollar, expanding their empire across the economy. Industrial titans like Andrew Mellon, who also happened to be the U.S. Treasury Secretary, shielded their wealth inside complex family trusts. When prices hit bottom, those trusts were ready to buy everything back. Factories, farmlands, and entire corporations changed hands. The Depression destroyed millions and created a new ruling class that could buy America wholesale. Every collapse built a new empire. The shocking part is that none of this was illegal. Before 1933, there were no federal securities laws, no ban on insider trading, and no separation between commercial and investment banking. A single institution could take your deposits, gamble them in the market, and never tell you what it was doing. Bankers and brokers formed what were known as stock pools, small circles of wealthy insiders who bought and sold among themselves to artificially inflate prices. Once the public jumped in, believing they were witnessing genuine demand, the insiders cashed out, leaving everyone else with worthless shares. Then, as panic set in, those same insiders used their cash reserves to scoop up assets at rock-bottom prices. It was a masterclass in market psychology, chess played against a nation that didn't yet know the rules. They didn't break the system, they simply played it before the boundaries existed. But even kings can't rule forever. By 1932, public anger boiled over. Unemployment had reached 25%, thousands of banks had failed, and Congress began investigating what and who caused the collapse. Charles E. Mitchell became the perfect villain. He was dragged before the Senate Banking Committee, accused of tax evasion and reckless speculation. His reputation disintegrated, and he resigned in disgrace. Yet behind the headlines, Mitchell still lived comfortably. He had already transferred his fortune into trusts beyond the government's reach. Joseph Kennedy, on the other hand, took a very different path. He re-emerged not as a speculator, but as a statesman. He supported Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidential campaign, and in 1934, Roosevelt appointed him as the first chairman of the newly created Securities and Exchange Commission, the very agency designed to prevent the kind of manipulation that had made Kennedy rich. The fox, as they said, was now guarding the henhouse. To his credit, Kennedy took the job seriously. He enforced transparency rules, ended stock pool practices, and helped push through the Securities Act of 1933 and the Exchange Act of 1934. For the first time, companies had to disclose their financials to the public. Some called it redemption. The sinner turned reformer. Others saw pure calculation. The man who cleaned up the casino only after cashing out his chips. Meanwhile, Mellon and Morgan adapted rather than vanished. Their empires morphed into banking, energy, and charitable foundations that ensured their power would outlive the Depression itself. Nearly a century later, the ghosts of 1929 still haunt global finance. The very safeguards built in the 1930s, disclosure, deposit insurance, oversight, have been weakened, deregulated, and rewritten. Insider knowledge, leverage, and access to liquidity still determine who wins when crises hit. In 2008 and 2020, the same pattern repeated. Panic for the public. Opportunity for the prepared? Citibank, J.P. Morgan, and the Kennedy dynasty all trace their modern power back to the decisions made during the Great Depression. The system didn't collapse. It consolidated. And here's the real secret that kept their fortunes alive long after the headlines faded. They never sold everything. Instead, they hid wealth in trusts, foundations, and shell companies designed to survive any tax or political storm. The Mellon Foundation still controls billions. The Kennedy trusts continue to fund political influence, and the corporate descendants of J.P. Morgan remain among the most powerful financial institutions on Earth. To the average person, it looks like genius financial engineering. To them, it was just another Tuesday. So, were they villains or visionaries? Maybe both. They mastered a system that rewards those who understand it and punishes those who don't. They proved that in capitalism, collapse isn't an ending, it's a reset. And every reset redistributes wealth upward to the few who can see it coming. The Great Depression didn't just change the world's economy, it revealed who truly runs it. If you stayed until the end, drop a comment form. Where are you watching this video?